Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer who is passionate about helping all of us to use the really difficult things in our life to grow and heal and show up as the best version of ourselves. I am joined today by my producer, Aaron Bender.
And we are joined today by Mary Beth O'Connor. From Junkie to Judge is her book that you are holding up right there. And
Yes.
I'm curious, I mean, you're in trials all the time. What is your, like, if somebody said, hey, what's the craziest story that you have involving a judge?
Well, I have, okay.
Inside or outside the courtroom?
Yeah, so that's not the question I wanted you to ask me.
Okay, all right.
But because I got lots of crazy stories about judges, I've almost been arrested by a judge. This isn't the craziest story, but can I tell you the last time I was around a federal judge?
Yes, and while you do that, I'll turn on my light.
Okay, so about 20 years ago, no, maybe 19 or 18 years ago, because I was like a lawyer for a couple of months at the time. I went to a friend's wedding and she had assigned seating. It was like a fancy wedding. And she thought it would be a great idea. It would be such a gift to me to sit me down next to a federal judge that was also attending her wedding. I was in a full-on sweat the entire time. Like, Jeff was like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" I'm like, "I'm just so nervous. I'm so nervous." Like, I was just fangirling so hard that I was in a flop sweat the entire time.
Just like I am now.
Well, that's nothing new for you. I make people nervous. We have Mary Beth O'Connor joining us today, author of Junkie to Judge. She has a fascinating story. Mary Beth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Holly. Good to be here.
Yes. So I have to say, I have not seen you before right now. And reading the stories in this book, very detailed accounts of sort of the grittiest part, I would say, of the human experience, I would never know that is where you came from and you had those experiences. Do you get that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I say sort of like this is what 31 years of sobriety and healing looks like, right? And
Yeah.
so that's the good good thing. It's sort of the good message to people that are still struggling that, you know, with time, and it's actually faster than you might think, you will sort of blend into the rest of society, and it's not going to be like you have a stamped across your forehead forever that you've had some traumatic experiences or you've struggled with addiction. So that's a positive.
Yes, I would say so. Yes. So I always kind of do this. I feel a little bit ahead of our audience because, you know, they haven't read the book. So tell us a little bit about this book.
Yeah, so I really thought hard about how to structure it because I wanted it to be useful. So the first third of my memoir, and it is a memoir, is about my pre-drug childhood, because I wanted to put it into context. Why did I start using drugs at 12? For me,
Right.
alcohol was my first drug. Why was I had escalated to shooting meth at 17? Why did I
Yes.
stay stuck in my addiction until 32? And now a lot of that explanation is in my pre-drug childhood, which is true for a lot of people that develop problems with substances, right? I had a childhood of physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal, emotional abuse, a lot of stress and strain. I had sexual assaults in early adulthood. So I wanted to make that clear that there usually is a reason why someone develops a problem with drugs, especially when they have a serious problem in their teenage years.
Right.
And then the middle third is sort of the normal typical memoir. Here's what the chaos of my addiction was like. Here's some of the things that happened. Here's some of my poor choices during that time. But then the last third is about recovery. It's about my first 3 years of recovery, because I wanted to put out a more sort of realistic example of what recovery really involves. And also to show the multiple ways to recover. Like, I have a more individualized recovery plan, and that I had to recover not just from my drug addiction, but also from my trauma history. I had PTSD and I didn't know it. I had severe anxiety. So that's why I structured the book that way, to try to help people understand better, and really to give a realistic recovery example.
Yeah. So you had, what I would call sort of a harrowing childhood. So let's kind of start there. Your mom dropped you off at a convent, basically, right?
Yes, for the first 6 months of my life, I lived in a convent, and that's because when I'm a little older than you are, and when my mother was pregnant with me, it was a big deal to be unmarried and pregnant, and so
Right.
she wasn't allowed to bring me home, and I lived at a convent, and that was sort of that attachment separation, right? I didn't have that time
Yes.
with my mother that a baby benefits from. But even once I moved in with her, she really wasn't connected or interested in me. So
Right.
that just sort of exacerbated that problem.
Right. And one of the things that really sort of stuck out to me, and I think it's like anytime you're introduced to someone else's experience or reading a book or whatever, like the things that stick out to you are things that you can kind of relate to, right? And the things that are maybe resonate with something in your life. And so in my day job is as a divorce and custody lawyer. And oftentimes I'm working with a lot of dads who feel like the fight for custody, the fight to be involved in their child's life is just not worth it. Mom is making it difficult for all sorts of different reasons, which we don't really need to get into today. But my advice always to them is like, please fight. Even if you don't get the result you want, please fight for your kids. Your kids need you to fight for them. They need to know one day you fought so hard. And so the thing in your book that really stuck, I mean, one of the things, there was a lot of stuff where I was like, ooh, whoa. But one of the things that as I was reading your book, I thought, that's a source of pain, was you say your dad never asked for visitation with you. And so was that, I mean, I think I already know the answer, but since everybody else hasn't read the book, like that meant something to you, right? Like if he would have fought for you and if he would have asked for visitation with you, that would have maybe made you feel a different way.
Yeah, and that was my bio dad, who I didn't even actually know
Yes.
about until I was in my teenage years. But yeah, he didn't ask for visitation. But also, the dad that I thought was my bio dad, that I lived with from when I was 6 months old until I was 6 years old, he's the one, my
Yes.
mom married him, and that's how I got out of the convent.
Yes. Was
When
this
they
Alan?
divorced, that was John. That was John.
Okay.
Alan was my stepfather.
Got
When
it.
they divorced, I didn't see him much either. And he's the one I had the emotional parental bond with. And so she left at 6. We saw him maybe, a couple times a year. And then once I was 13, I didn't see him again until I was in my 40s. And so
Yeah.
you're right, there was that. I didn't have a good parent anywhere. My mother wasn't connected. My bio dad had already left. The man she married, who did adopt me, he wasn't really around that much. And then she married my stepfather, who was really violent and abusive. And so I had I had 4 parents, and I had no parents at the same time,
Wow.
and that had
Yeah.
a big impact. You're right, it had a big impact.
So is your mom still alive?
No,
Okay. So she has never read this book?
that's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Okay. Was she involved? Like, were you in touch with her as an adult after you were in recovery?
I was in touch with her to a degree, and part of that was because my mother ended up with custody of my sister's kids, my nieces and nephew,
Oh,
because my sister, like me, had a drug problem, and I wanted access to the kids, as their
okay.
aunt. Like my
Right.
husband and I would take them every summer for a week or two, and so I had to deal with my mother because she had custody of the kids that I wanted to be able to see.
Right.
But also, the issue with my mom wasn't so much what she did in my childhood. It was that my mother never really changed. Like, she
Yeah.
kept doing things in my adulthood. She was violent, with me, even up until the last time I was around 35, the last time that she was
Wow.
violent with me. But also, she was just very demanding and very volatile and created a lot of chaos. And she wanted things from me. And so, I had to learn how to emotionally distance from her in my recovery. Like in the
Right.
beginning, I reacted to her like I copied her behavior because that's how I grew up, right? She's
Of
screaming, I'm
course.
screaming, right?
Yes, of course.
But as I got sober and more clarity, I started to get to the point of like, I don't want to behave like this. Like this isn't helpful, and so I had to learn how to interact with her without getting emotionally engaged, and that was definitely a process. but I did learn to deal with her by being civil, but not letting her push my buttons and not having that sort of emotional connection that never really existed anyway. So we got sort of to this neutral relationship. She kept trying to sort of drag me in, but I got better and better and better at not letting her do that.
Yes. Well, that's what it's all about, right? Is, recognizing those triggers and making different choices in those moments.
Yes. And it does take practice, it does take practice.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the most difficult parts of the book, and I actually kind of had to gloss over it because it was really causing, I just had never seen such a specific account of the sexual abuse, the molestation. What impact did that have on your life?
Yeah, I had, a history of multiple sexual assaults, including from my stepfather. He molested me when I was young. And then also there was just always a threat of another sexual assault with him. Like he would
Right.
say things. And so I never knew how far is he going to go, this time. And then I had sexual assaults outside the home, including one really long kidnapping and rape by 3 men where I really I thought this was the end. Like I thought I was going to die. And so all of that really did play into not only starting my substance use, because in the beginning the substances help, right? Like in the beginning they work. They keep the pain at bay. They make your hard life sort of more distant. But they also, those other experiences kept compounding it. And so it kept me stuck for a long time. I really felt like the only way that I saw to manage that level of pain from sort of my vast and deep trauma history was with drugs. I didn't know any other way to do it, and that really kept me stuck for a very long time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the book, I've never read a book like this and maybe they're out there and it just hasn't been on my radar. I'm sure they are. But the drug use, there's very specific accounts and details regarding the drug use. You shooting up the veins in your legs and the feeling that you get when you snort it. I was just like fascinated. I mean, drugs aren't a part of my personal experience, but I kind of find it fascinating because I feel like it's this sort of whole other world that I have never been personally exposed to. So I'm always very curious about it. And this was a very specific and detailed accounts. So it was really fascinating to read, particularly how you describe the feelings. And I'll be totally honest, I'm feeling a little bit of stress right now. And the way you're describing, I was like, maybe meth is the answer. I don't know. Like the way, no, I know. I know. Cause I read to the end of your book. So I'm like, this is not the answer. But the way you describe those feelings initially of just sort of this euphoria and this, I mean, it's not really a release of pain. It's more of a suppression of pain,
Yes.
but maybe in the moment it feels like a release. I don't know. Is that accurate to say?
I think it's the two prongs that you mentioned. One is that it does help you suppress the pain. It makes all of that seem more distant or not as important. But on the other side, it made me feel, it releases a lot of dopamine, drugs.
Yes.
It made me feel happy and joyful and sort of like more engaged with the people, we're having a good time. And I hadn't felt that because I lived in such a stressful situation. I wasn't used to feeling that much positive pleasure. And so it's both. It numbs the pain and it makes you feel good. That is a hard combination to fight when you're in that kind of pain and when you don't really have the help that you need to address what's going on. It's kind of like sometimes I get asked, what's the one thing we could do to reduce America's addiction rate, which is one of the highest in the world. And my answer to that really is always mental health and trauma treatment for kids.
Yes.
Because if you would intervene early, if I would have been, someone would have recognized what was going on and helped me and got me the proper care, my odds of developing an addiction would have been a lot lower. But I didn't have any of that. So drugs seemed, were the only solution that I found. And in the beginning, they do work. That's why, I kept pursuing them because they were helping me in the beginning.
Right. So what would you say to parents? How do we best, protect our kids from addiction?
Well, I mean, there is a very strong correlation between trauma and mental health and developing an addiction. So if your child has had any type of trauma, it doesn't have to be that they were sexually assaulted, but I mean, even let's say they're a victim of bullying, that's a form of trauma. Or if the parents are going through a very difficult divorce and there's a lot of conflict, that can be a trauma. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yes,
But
yes.
or if they show any signs of a mental health disorder, are they struggling with depression or anxiety or any sign that, or ADHD even, those mental health conditions untreated will increase the odds that they're going to turn to substances. It's sort of a self-medication process if they're not properly treated. So parents can look for those signs and get them the help they need early. That's a big one. And then there are sort of places you can go to look for sort of like how to have honest conversations with your teens about drugs. I know Stanford and the Drug Policy Alliance have a program that they've developed that's evidence-based that you could Google and find that online. Because the reality is if you tell your teens, so my feeling about talking to teenagers is we don't want to exaggerate the negatives, but we don't want to minimize them either. I think it's important to give accurate information. If you tell them that smoking weed is going to lead to heroin or something, like they know that's not true for most people, right? They'll stop listening. But on the other hand, there are real risks, even with alcohol in particular, but cannabis and other drugs. And so I think it's important to have the honest conversations, but also to help them protect themselves. Like if they do, let's say, use a drug, that they should, with their friends, make sure that somebody's sober. They should not all use the drug at the same time in case there's a problem so they can react to it. If they're all high, it's harder to sort of help your friend than if, somebody does the drug, let's say it was a pill, and then you wait 30 minutes and make sure they're okay before the rest of you do it. I mean, I know parents don't like to hear things like that.
God, I know this is terrifying right now. Oh my God.
But true harm reduction strategies are important because most kids will do some type of experimentation, hopefully at a low level. And so those kind of things I think is important for parents to know. Like the real threat of fentanyl, that today kids don't know what's in their drugs. That's true. That's an accurate risk. That's why like having Narcan in the house can be important. So there are good programs that have done research on how to talk to kids so they'll hear you. And one of them is about being honest and not about sort of fear mongering, because they will know what when you're telling them something that isn't true, and they won't listen to you anymore.
Right. Okay. So, your book is From Junkie to Judge. And I always have to be careful not to say it backwards. I don't want to say from judge to junkie. But I have made that mistake before the show. So, you were a junkie. I guess you would describe yourself in that way. Hopefully that's okay to say. That's the title of the book. Junkie. Then you went to college, you went to law school, you became a lawyer, you became a judge, not just any judge, but a federal judge. So I think maybe the assumption of most people would think, oh, well, she probably got sober as a teenager and then went off and had a wonderful college experience at UCLA and then got into one of the top law schools at UC Berkeley, being this clean and sober person. And, the trajectory went from there. But that is not true, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So I was shooting meth at 17. I was in full bore addiction when I graduated high school. I did go to college. I started at UCLA and then I transferred to Berkeley, and I did better for the first couple of years. And we are lawyers, we're wordsmiths. We know that better and good are not the same word.
Right. Yes.
But I did somewhat better. But then I had that sexual assault we talked about. I had a violent boyfriend, and I started using meth again on a regular basis in January of my senior year of college, and didn't get sober till 32.
Right.
So it was a really long haul for me, which meant that law school was at 39, and I graduated at 42 to become a lawyer. And I was appointed a federal judge 20 years into my sobriety when I was in my 50s. And so it was that sort of a trajectory, yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about how, I don't recall if it was at college or law school, but you withdrew multiple times because you were still in addiction, right?
Yes. So I had been accepted to Berkeley Law right out of college, but I started using meth again regularly in January. And by the time I got there in the fall, I was in no shape to do it. Like I would literally miss weeks of class. Like, we had that nightmare sometimes where we've done that, but I would do it. And so,
Yes.
yes, I withdrew. I handed back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. And it was an agonizing loss. Like I hated driving by that building, like yeah,
Yes.
it was terrible. But I did because I knew there was no way I was going to finish.
Right.
And so when I got sober, I'm 32. I have my Berkeley degree in good grades, but I had, lost law school. But I had also spent those last 10 years just sort of working my way down the corporate ladder.
Yes. That was funny. Yes.
Because I couldn't get to work and I couldn't concentrate and I'd miss
Right.
all kinds of time. And so my last job before rehab was word processing and I held it for
Yeah.
9 months. Like that's really where I was. So professionally, as in with the rest of my life, I had to start where I was at 32 years old, which was starting from a place where I had destroyed or seriously harmed pretty much every area of my life.
Right. I have to say, though, you must be incredibly intelligent because you talk about a time where you hadn't been to tax in law school in like a couple months and you show up and you're like, I'm worried I'm going to fail this class. I went to tax every single day and I still worried that I was going to fail that class. So I was like, this is a smart cookie because you actually did a lot with, while being in full-blown addiction and while sort of navigating the traumas of your life, both current and past. And so I do have to hand it to you that you must be incredibly intelligent and definitely have, a lot of skills and something to even get that far with what was going on in your life.
Yeah, but what I had lost during those 10 years was really a connection to that. When I got sober, that was all like vague ancient history. And I didn't
Yes.
have the skills to even, get to work on time every day. Like when I got out of rehab, my first professional goal was let's not get fired again. Like that's where I was, And I
Right.
started with part-time, low-level, temporary work when I got home from rehab because nobody was going to hire me for a career job, but I wasn't ready either. I needed to sort of remember what it was like to be disciplined, to do the go to work on time and stay all day and do a good job. I had to rebuild that in my sobriety because I had lost my connection to it during those 10 years after college.
Wow. Yeah. So one of the things I want to make sure that we get to, because I find it fascinating, is you are a proclaimed atheist, correct?
Yeah, I'm an atheist. Yeah.
And so because of that, you really wanted and needed a secular recovery program. And there probably wasn't a lot out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say, in recovery, it's not like there's like a hard line where all the faith-based people go to 12 steps, and 12 steps, of course, is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and all the Anonymouses,
Yeah.
and like all the non-faith-based people go to the other groups. There are atheists and agnostics that can make 12 steps work. I couldn't, but some can. But
Okay.
there are a lot of faith-based and spiritual people who prefer the secular options because the program is structured in a different way. So it's not like there's that hard faith-based line.
Yeah.
But for me, when I went into rehab, and this is in '93, they swore to me that 12 steps was the only option. And I wasn't a good fit for me because of higher power, but also I didn't like the focus on defects. I didn't really believe in turning over my will in my life and the powerless. It just wasn't the right fit, as it isn't the right fit for many. It
Yeah.
works great for many people, and I support that, but it's not right for everyone. And they lied to me and told me there was no other way. And so when I got home from rehab, and it's now January of '94, and there's no Google in January of '94. Okay?
Right.
So I went to the library and I actually found other groups even then. And today there's many choices. Like I'm on the board for Life Brings Secular Recovery, and I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation, and there are other peer support options. And so, the good news is that pretty much everyone can find a group that'll be comfortable for them, where they'll
Yeah.
feel like this philosophy is good, or I like this meeting format. And because now we have meetings online, even if there isn't, like, let's say a She Recovers meeting in your town, there might be, but if there isn't, you can always do it online. So people have easy access to choice and peer support today, which is to their benefit. Find where you're
Of
most comfortable,
course.
and you're going to
Yeah.
have a better chance. You know.
Yeah. So we've had people on the show before that have talked about addiction, and we've had a lot of people talking about trauma and traumatic experiences and all these things. And I actually, thinking back, I think every single one of them has cited sort of some source of higher power as a source of strength. So what I'm so interested in with you is you have been, you've hit rock bottom. You've been in the depths of, what a person could be in life. So without a higher power, what do you cling to? What gives you strength? What got you out of it?
Yeah, so I mean, the approaches that I use are really called self-empowered recovery, and they focus on an individual recovery plan. And so the data, we now know that recovery plans should be tailored to the individual because people are in different places and they
Yeah.
need different things. Like for example, I needed to do trauma therapy and mental health therapy at the same time that I was working on my sobriety. Today we call that a dual diagnosis person, right? And so a lot of us need that. We need both things to work on.
Right.
People are, some people have a mild or a moderate addiction. I had a very severe one. That impacts what's the right treatment plan for you, right? So there's a lot of individual decisions based on your circumstances that should be made about your treatment plan and your recovery plan. And so that's how I viewed it as well. I was looking for what would work for me. But I will say the biggest thing that helped me is that I did understand in my early recovery that even the people who were doing 12 steps, which wasn't the best fit for me, they still knew things I didn't know. Like they
Okay.
had already had some success, right? So I always viewed it as sort of my job to listen and to think about what had worked for other people, their strategies, their techniques. But I viewed myself as the decision maker, like that I would filter them for, is this a good strategy for me? Or is this a good technique for me? Or sometimes, is it something I can work on right now? Or do I have to put it aside because I can't fix everything at once,
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's really how I viewed it. And that helped me start to feel more competent, and confident because I was taking ownership. But ownership with my ears open, ownership with reading. I mean, I read all the AA Big Book and the NA text. I read the Women for Sobriety book and the Rational Recovery book, and I was talking to people. So I was very open to ideas and techniques, but I always view myself as I'm the boss of my recovery. I get to decide what my plan is, and I'm going to adjust my plan over time, as we all do.
Okay. So when you look at your life today, I mean, can you even believe the trajectory? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean that's where the book came from. Was when I was appointed a federal judge, I started thinking, how the heck did I go from shooting at
Right.
17 to federal judge, right?
Yes.
But the other thing I will emphasize is, look, I am very proud that I had worked my way up to being appointed a federal judge. But that isn't the most important part of my recovery, right? That was my job. It's an indicator
Yes.
of the robustness of my recovery. That it shows that, but it's not the most important part for
Right.
me. The key and joy of recovery is sort of the lack of chaos and the lack of misery. And so
Yes.
now, my life is fairly calm. I have mostly healed from my trauma. I don't struggle. I struggle with anxiety a bit, but at a much lower level. I have a long-term partner. I'm like a good aunt, and a
Yeah.
sister, and I give back to my community. These are all sort of the joys of recovery. And yes,
Right.
I am surprised because when I got sober at 32, I thought, I'm an old woman. I wasted my life. Sure, life could get better, but it could like maybe get this much better. I didn't really understand how much time I had left, how many years there were. And I also didn't really understand sort of the snowball effect of incremental improvement. I mean, because that's what I built my recovery plan around, was prioritizing and, what's my first goal in this area and my first plan, and implement plan two, goal two,
Yeah.
I didn't. I talk a lot with newcomers now about how those positive choices and those positive steps forward will really snowball over time and just open up so many different possibilities for them in their life. It's a wonderful benefit of long-term sobriety.
Yes. So, yes, I would call you becoming a federal judge a trailing indicator. Like you had to do a lot of work, internal and external to get to that. And so
Yes.
that's sort of the external tangible result that we can see. But clearly a lot had to happen between, shooting meth intravenously to being appointed a federal judge. Like that's a lot of work that went on in between. So if you could boil it down to like three things, I mean, if somebody's listening right now and feels like they are where you were in your 30s, where they got stuff going on in their life, whether it's addiction or depression or mental health, it's not good. They're feeling like hopeless, maybe. What could you tell them? What three things or one thing could they do to sort of pull themselves out of it and change the trajectory of their life?
I think one of the important things is to not wait to get the help you need until you're sure of what your goal is. In other words, don't wait. You don't wait until you're 100% committed to 100% sobriety to start the process, right? Because most of us don't start the process there. We get there over time. Like for example, I used meth 3 times in my first 5 months. That's common. Perfect abstinence from day one. It happens, but it's not the norm. Don't wait until you feel you're ready to be perfect to start. Start where you are. Start now. You can start making positive steps forward, even if you're not going to be perfect. The other thing is, it is really important to get an individual assessment, if you can, about what you need and what will work for you. So if you do have another mental health disorder, and 55 to 75% of the people with an addiction do, and by the way, addiction is a substance use disorder. That's the medical term. It's a mental health disorder. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Addiction is a mental health disorder. But if you also have any other mental health disorder, it is usually very necessary for you to start addressing that, not just to stay sober, but also if you don't deal with what's underneath your addiction, a lot of times you'll pick up a new behavioral problem. Like you'll start, excessive shopping or
Yes.
gaming or get into a negative relationship. And so you have to think about what was underneath my substance use and start working on that as well. And then the other thing I'll really say is patience. Patience and persistence are really the key. Be realistic about where you are and what you can do, like now, versus your fantasy world. I mean, I will say in recovery, everyone I ever met wants the process to go faster than it does, right?
Yeah. Just like anything, like weight loss, getting on a diet, it's like, what do you mean? I had a salad today. Why am I not skinny yet? Just like
Exactly
everything.
right. Exactly right. I've been sober for a year. Why isn't my life perfect? I mean,
Yes.
it's a process, and it can
Right.
be important to sort of be patient with it. I was 32, and I didn't like the fact that I couldn't just like leap forward and fix everything, but I had to
Right.
accept it and really focus on what I could do now. I will say, like for me, I had to prioritize what to work on because I had broken so much of my life. You can only work on so many things at once. You cannot have 12 goals in 12 big areas and make progress, right? I picked
Right.
5 things. And so that kind of patience with the process, being persistent, those are really the keys to your long-term success. And getting to a place where you can accept that is really important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. You must be so proud of yourself, to completely turn your life around and basically achieve something that, only a fraction of the people ever achieve. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. And and if anyone wants to reach me, they can do it through my website, junkietojudge.com, and a lot of information is there about me as well.
Amazing. We'll make sure that all your information is in the show notes so that people can reach out to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for the conversation.
Absolutely. I've got just a little bit more to say. You guys may or may not know this, but becoming a federal judge is a pretty big deal. Um, I mean, not many people can do that. In the legal world, not many people do that. That's a big deal. And if Mary Beth can go from literally shooting up meth to being appointed as a federal judge, that means there's a whole lot of hope for the rest of us. I mean, that's like taking the worst of the worst and becoming the best of the best. And so I love her advice to us is don't wait until you're ready. Start where you are right now, wherever you are. I mean, you may not be, at the depths of society shooting up meth in a vein in your leg. That may not be you, but you're somewhere. We're all somewhere. We're all struggling with something. And if we wait until everything is perfect and we're absolutely ready to do something better or more, we're probably never going to get there. So don't wait until you're ready. Start where you are, and then have a lot of patience and persistence because you were made for more. A prenuptial agreement, or sometimes called a premarital agreement, is an agreement that two parties enter into before they get married that basically chooses to deviate from state law. It assigns rights and responsibilities regarding assets and debts that are acquired during the marriage. Some common misconceptions about prenups are, one, that they basically doom the marriage to failure, or that it's really planning to divorce, and neither of those things are true. But the real value of a prenup is talking about and creating rules around how the things that you acquire during the marriage are going to be characterized. A prenup can protect things like art collections, real estate portfolios, businesses, all those types of assets. The ideal timeline to get a prenup is not 2 weeks before the wedding. The final version of a prenup has to be presented to the parties 7 days before they actually sign it. So there's like a 7-day waiting period. As soon as you get engaged, you should seek a lawyer's advice and counsel on a prenup and start the process then, because the closer the prenup is signed to the wedding, the more likely that the court is going to think there was some sort of duress involved in that person signing it, and they have to prove that the prenup was signed voluntarily in order for them to be enforced. At More Family Law Group, we represent a lot of high-profile people, celebrities, professional athletes, business tycoons. If you already have a lot of assets or you think you're going to be acquiring a lot of assets during your marriage, we are the best ones to protect that for you and help you make your marriage stronger. Call More Family Law Group today.